Hi, welcome back to Crops TV. I'm Billy Beck, Extension Forestry Specialist with ISU Extension and Outreach, and also Assistant Professor in the Department of Natural Resource Ecology and Management at ISU. Today, we're talking pasture trees, so let's hit it. I love starting out with this slide because I'm a firm believer that trees, forests, and forestry can benefit the agricultural bottom line and also provide a range of benefits to the agricultural landscape, such as clean water, clean air, wildlife habitat, recreation, aesthetics, mental health, the list goes on. This is a cool example, and you'll be seeing photos from this site throughout my presentation today. This is a rotational grazing operation in Polk County, Iowa, and it just shows the range of forest and tree practices that can go onto a farm with minimal footprint and benefit the bottom line and also the agricultural landscape. So this person has windbreaks, riparian buffers, and oak grove for fuel and fence posts, nut tree plantings for marketing and personal use. And then, relevant to today, in the northeast corner, they are starting a silvopasture operation. So for today, we want to talk about the benefits and challenges of pasture trees. I want to get into a little bit of tree physiology basics. I promise it's going to be very exciting, but it is very relevant to how we space trees, the trees we select, and how we protect those trees amongst livestock. We'll get into planning, design, and establishment, talking about the site, spacing, and species selection. And then finally, almost utmost importance is physical protection of trees when established in a pasture. So for starters, pastures and trees are often called silvopasture. Silvo trees, pasture, pasture. Silvopasture has been around for eons, but in Iowa, in the agricultural Midwest, the modern agricultural Midwest, silvopasture is an emerging practice, so it's fairly new. In a nutshell, it's the deliberate integration of trees and livestock. So this differs greatly from unmanaged forest grazing. So silvopasture is not just throwing the cattle out into the woods without a plan. It's very, very different from that. The goal of silvopasture is to optimize, not maximize, livestock, trees, and forage. So you've got these three components. You're not trying to maximize one of these, you're trying to optimize all of them. Also, it's essential to have the willingness and ability to rotate livestock. So for today, silviculture has a lot of different facets. Today, I want to really focus on adding trees to established pasture. You can do a lot of different things with silviculture to set up the system, but today we're going to focus exclusively on adding trees into established pasture. All right, the benefits of this are great and diverse. And again, a lot of this is new in the agricultural Midwest. A lot of these data come from the southeastern United States. So I'm very excited to work with the beef team to get some solid recommendations for Iowa and the agricultural Midwest, even though we're going to be going over some main components and concepts today. The one cool thing about silvopasture is that the overall output is often greater than the sum of the individual parts. And what I mean by that is that you're going to get greater output from your land in general versus doing these things individually on the same parcel of land. This is a neat little figure here from Kellenbach 2006. The solid line is a silvopasture system, trees and pasture. The dotted line is a traditional, so pasture only with livestock on it. And on the axis there, you can see pasture growth rate, so kilograms per hectares per day. And you see with the traditional system, there is a bump in, that summer, June to July, August period of forage growth, pasture over integrated. But the neat thing is, look at the spring and the fall, the integrated system actually does much better. So that's because A, trees buffer the environment, right? They buffer wind, they buffer temperature that can have value to the livestock and also value to the forage. So this is just a neat example of that integrated nature and how it can benefit the operation in different times of the year. There's also potential for increased nutritive values, both increased nutrition of the forage and also the trees or shrubs planted in the pasture, having those plants provide direct nutritional value to the livestock. An example of that, and don't roll your eyes, is honey locust. So honey locust is a legume, so it's an end fixer, provides end to the soil, but also the pods are edible from livestock and provide added nutritional value for their presence in the pasture. The one thing I love about silvopasture for my role as the extension forester is the income diversification aspect that it provides to farmers. So you've got the short-term income from livestock, but then you've also got the long-term income from timber potentially and non-timber forest products down the road. So when you have access to these different markets, your economic risk is potentially reduced. And of course, when you add a diversity of vegetation to the landscape, you get benefits to wildlife habitat, water quality, aesthetics, recreation, all those different things that woody vegetation provides. I'll give a cool example of water quality. You might be thinking, what the heck would pasture trees have to do with water quality? But often, pasture trees provide shade and shelter that could discourage livestock from loafing and spending a significant time in adjacent waterways. All right, the challenges. So these are some serious challenges to think about deeply before attempting a silvipastoral system. I keep saying silviculture. I'm a forester, so silvipastoral system. So there's much greater management, obviously, versus traditional pasture. Right? You've got that tree component or that shrub component in there that you now have to manage. So more management overall. You're going to get lower total forage growth. Even though looking back to that graph and talking about the sum of the parts, the output from the land will be greater, but you'll have lower total forage growth. Often cool season grasses max out their photosynthetic capability in well below full sunlight, which means there's sunlight out there not being used. So if trees can capture that sunlight and turn it into a product, that's adding value to that pasture system. Again, rotation is essential. You need to be able to rotate the cattle or livestock in these systems. So think about that. Another challenge is you're going to be planting trees into established sod. Cool season grasses, especially, the roots are highly competitive with the roots of young seedlings. So grass control, herbicide, mechanical control measures are absolutely critical. And then finally, physical protection. I mean, trees get damaged by small creatures like dogs and deer. You can imagine what larger livestock could do to these things. And physical protection of the tree itself, but also the root zone below that tree. Something very, very important to think about. All right, real quick. I want to talk about tree physiology basics because it has a lot to do with what we plant and where we plant it and how we protect these trees in these situations. So, figure A. I love this figure. I also hate this figure because every shirt, bumper sticker, poster I see of a tree root system, the tree roots are depicted as such on the left. The big X there means that's absolutely not how they grow. They do not grow in this uniform fan shape out and down. They grow out laterally. Most of the roots, especially the fine roots that suck up the water and dissolve nutrients in that water, are located within the top meter of soil. So it's very important to protect that area from soil compaction because it can negatively affect those fine roots. And look at the spread in figure A. So the roots generally don't go down very deep, but they go laterally very far, up to 2 to 3 times the mature height of that tree is where those roots can laterally spread. So think about impacts well beyond the tree could affect the health of that individual tree. And you can see that in C. This is a neat figure from the 60s, but all those black dots are maple stems, maple trees in a forest. And the main tree of study here, you can see how far those roots go out laterally and how many other trees they're competing with as they move out in that extent. And finally, D, tree roots grow in 2 main time periods during the year. They've got a big burst of growth in the spring, it tapers down in the summer, and then they get a second burst of growth in the fall up until the soil freezes. All right, second thing to think about. Trees grow in 2 areas. This giant organism, they grow in 2 very small concentrated areas. They grow in 2 ways. Primary growth means the elongation of stems, that's where you get your height. And secondary growth means diameter increase. So that's where you get the width of those stems. And growth occurs in areas called meristems. And these are areas of rapid cell division of undifferentiated cells. So this giant organism of a tree, really, it's only growing in these 2 small regions that we'll hit here. So the primary growth happens at the apical meristem, or the buds, the tips of the twigs. Those break and that tree elongates. It doesn't grow up from the base of the soil like many folks think. So, very, very critical to protect those buds. Second, this is also a meristem, but it's a ring around the interior of the stem or the log called the vascular cambium. This is a secondary meristem. This is where the diameter growth of wood and trees occur. So this ring is only a few cells thick, and every year it divides, producing those nice tree rings that we're all familiar with, and those tree rings eventually become wood. On the inside of this meristem, they produce xylem, which transports water and nutrients up. On the outside of this ring, it produces phloem, which carries the photosynthate, the sugary goodness from the leaves, down to the remainder of the tree. So this figure shows that that cambium, that very sensitive area, is right on the outside of that tree. It's only a few cells thick. You can see here the phloem on the outside, xylem or wood on the inside. So another thing to think about, we really need to protect that area. Any kind of damage to that zone can affect cambial growth and obviously the vigor and the health and the overall growth rate of that tree. So the buds and that cambium are very, very critical for protection. Okay, we got through tree physiology. So things to think about when planning. So we're going to talk about planning, design, establishment. Planning is absolutely critical, like in any agricultural operation. Really think deeply about your goals, right? So we've got goals for the livestock, we've got goals for the forage, we've got goals for the trees, and we've got goals for the system as a whole. So really know your sites and your soils. Matching the tree species to the site is absolutely critical for a vigorous tree. Think about your forage type and your fodder. If you have forage, what's the tolerable shade for that forage? If you're establishing trees for fodder, what's the nutritional value of, say, that foliage, or say, like we talked about before, those honey locust pods that could add nutritional value for the livestock? And then obviously think about your livestock that you're having on your pasture. You can graze chickens, pigs, llamas, cattle, wide range out there. Probably most importantly is think about your resource limitations, your time, your financial resources. Again, do you have the ability and willingness to rotate these livestock through these silvopastoral systems? So really think about that deeply before you dive into this. All right. So planning. Where would this go on the farm? Where would silvopasture fit on my farm? You saw that initial slide I had. They were concentrating it in the northeast corner. So there's two general scenarios to think about when you're thinking about placing the system on your farm. If your interest is livestock, but also fruit production, nut production, timber production, you may want to concentrate the silvopasture in a select area of the farm. And we'll get into that in a second when we talk about spacing. If you're looking for livestock only, focusing on shade, forage, and fodder, you might spread that out across the entire farm, keeping in mind that putting trees in every single pasture is not recommended because there are benefits to having open pasture in the system. So if you're looking for additional income from fruits, nuts, and timber, concentrate. If you're looking for livestock only, you may want to spread that out across the system. This is a cool graphic from UW-Madison Extension, which is a resource you will be have access to with a QR code at the end of this talk. All right, let's talk shade. Shade is absolutely critical to think about when planning a silvopastoral system. We're really aiming for about 25 to 40% of the overall site, be it a paddock, pasture, 25 to 40% of that site in shade cover. That's ideal in general. If we get over 50% of the site in shade, forage growth declines. If we have less than 25% of the site in shade, the livestock tend to congregate around those individual trees. And we've all seen this, like that example there on the right. Bare soil, compact soil below that tree. We're going to be talking about species here in a second. That is a white mulberry, a non-native, probably not the best pasture tree, but look at the dense shade that casts. So that's another thing to consider is what's the shade that's cast by those individual tree species. Again, considering your forage when making that decision. All right, let's talk about design and spacing considerations. These are two general recommended designs out there for the silvopastoral system. And notice they're not like these random grids across the pasture here. And we'll get into why that is here in a second. So let's take A, for example. These are single rows of trees with 30 to 60 foot, we call them forage alleys in between. So these would probably be ideal for providing shade and fodder. So simply looking to promote the livestock and forage on the pasture, not looking at things like timber harvest in the future, right? One neat thing about this is, well, A, provides pretty good access for machinery. B, the north south orientation of these rows allows for a great deal of sunlight to hit that forage during the entire day. And as the sun moves across the sky with those single rows, the shade moves across the site and changes, which encourages livestock to move and not concentrate in one single area. So notice that these trees are getting full sun from both sides of their canopy. So let's take B, little bit different, double or even triple rows, again with the 30 to 60 foot forage alleys, might be ideal or may be ideal for timber, nut production, other things like that. And why would that be? Is because for timber, let's take timber specifically, if you have 2 or 3 rows, portions of the tree's crown are protected by their neighbors. So they're shaded out by their neighbors, which is good if you want those trees to fight for sunlight and grow straight up with minimal limbs up and down the stem, which is valuable in the timber market. So more crowding, more shading you've got on the sides, the less limbs you're going to have in general, and that is better for timber production down the road. Now you could grow timber in A, you would just have to do a heck of a lot of pruning during the process. But things to think about, again, going back to your goals and what you want out of this system. Other considerations, again, we're going with the rows here. So these are still rows. But if there's winds of concern, say in winter, you want to orientate those perpendicular to the prevailing winds of concern. D, if there's a slope of concern, you may considering planting those tree rows along the contour to protect maybe a sensitive slope there. So still rows, but a different thing to consider with winds and slope. All right, so let's talk about in-row spacing of individual trees and then the spacing between the sets of rows. So a close spacing in the forestry world is about 6 to 10 foot in between the row and between the sets. So every tree is planted 6 to 10 feet apart. This may be preferred for quality timber. Maybe, remember, when they're close together, they shade each other, they shade out those lower branches, you get a nice clean stem. One thing with this, you're going to have a higher input right off the bat with stock, and you're going to have to thin these out when the canopies start closing and competing with each other. And again, this is going to provide greater initial shade if that is your goal. More trees per acre, greater shade. If we go wide, this might be beneficial for folks looking to produce wildlife habitat, fruit and nut production, other things like that. These are going to produce wider crowns because those crowns have more room to expand laterally, sunlight coming in from all 4 sides of that crown. And you're going to have a live crown ratio that's greater than if you were to space those closer together. And live crown ratio is essentially the percentage of the height of the tree that is in living crown. So with more space to go out, more sunlight available, they're going to move their crowns laterally, and you're going to have that greater live crown ratio, which again is excellent if you're looking for fruit, nut crops, wildlife habitat, things like that. Less pruning will be needed here because you're going after that wildlife fruit nut crop, and less thinning, obviously, because there's much more space to grow here. And again, less initial shade than going closer together. So a lot of things to consider with spacing. All right. This is the one that everybody seems to ask about, and we're going to talk about species selection. So it's some really, quick guidelines here. Very critical to match the site and the soils with the species that you're going to go with. A tree planted on an appropriate site is going to be much more vigorous than a tree planted on an inappropriate site. It's going to be more resistant to storms, pests and pathogens, dieback, compact soil, all that kind of good stuff. I do recommend going native when possible. I know it's not always possible, but native trees are much more adapted to Iowa's ever-changing climate. Hot, humid summers, cold, dry winters. They're going to do much, much better than a tree from other parts of the world or other parts of the country. Think diversity, too. Emerald ash borer is a great example of this. If you plant one species entirely over your silver pastoral operation, something could come in and knock all that out, and you lose functionality almost immediately. So think diversity of species. And your goals are important again, but think about when you're talking species, slower growth often means strong wood, so storm resistance, right? Fuel wood. Think about the storm resistant form of those trees, and we'll hit that in a second. Think about the canopy of the trees. Are they mottled? Do they provide heavy shade, light shade? Think about leaf emergence time. For example, black walnut leaves out very late in the season and drops its leaves very early in the fall. Does that match up with your forage goals with the shade? Something to think about. Compact soils. Often pastures have compact soils, and selecting tree species that do better in those compact soils is going to be key. And then lastly, one thing to think about with livestock is the toxicity. It's not rampant, but there are species that are toxic to certain livestock in certain amounts. We'll hit an example or two of those here in a second. All right. So I think we're like 5 for derechos over the last 4 years, but extreme weather events are prevalent in Iowa, whether a derecho or an ice storm or straight line winds, other things that impact our woodlands throughout the year. So, storm damage resilience really is something to think about. Having limbs down, having broken trees in a silvopasture system is not ideal. Just for this single example of machinery operation and clearance access. So, think about trees that may be more resistant to storm damage or high winds than others. And again, I've got examples here. All trees are valuable with unique roles. Some are just less storm resistant than others. So think about the growth form of these, the growth rate and the growth form, and how those might impact how resistant they are to storms or ice or other things. So susceptible tree species, an example list here, things like silver maple, hackberry, green ash, black cherry, American elm, basswood, all great trees, but they grow very, very fast. So these might not be the strongest wooded species out there. Middle of the road, intermediate, you have things like sugar maple, white pine, sycamore, bur oak, red oak. And then what I'll call resistant, and I say that because 120-mile-an-hour winds, most trees are going to be impacted to some degree. You've got things like serviceberry, Kentucky coffee tree, black walnut, white oak, and swamp white oak. Now think about the growth form of these species. They often have stout limbs, they often have fewer limbs, and they often have less dense canopies than the species in the susceptible category. So stout limbs, and less wind drag with less overall leaf area with these more resistant species. So just something to think about. Compact soil tolerance. A lot of times trees that grow naturally in lower areas in the landscape do well in compact soil situations that have less available oxygen, less available water, more difficult for those fine roots to expand out. So trees that are good in compact situations could be swamp white oak, chinkapin oak, honey locust, red cedar. For the latter two, I can see your eyes rolling out there. But no, for real, those two do well in compact situations. Also, trees that do well in compact situations are things like black cherry, silver maple, basswood, black willow. But I put an asterisk there because they also have characteristics that might not be appropriate for a silvopastoral system, like I said before, with storm resistance. So, multiple factors are going to go into your tree selection choice. With that QR code at the end, I've got a great publication that I'm going to recommend that's out there. Gives you a list of all these great native species in Iowa and what sites they do best on. So check that out with the QR code at the end. All right, toxicity. Again, this varies by livestock and acuteness. So with any forestry system, monitoring and assessment, regular monitoring and assessment are really key. And, Penn State Extension reminds us that fortunately, most healthy, well-fed animals will not eat toxic plants if they have access to good quality forage. So, some quick examples. This is not the end all list, but just some examples, again, to get you thinking about toxicity and specific livestock. Black cherry with cattle, black locust with cattle, Ohio buckeye with cattle. Horses, the list is much more extensive. I've presented 4 here: Kentucky coffee tree, red maple, oaks, and black walnut. So it can be the bark, it could be the leaves, it could be the fruits. It really depends on the livestock and the specific tree species you're looking at. So something to really consider is toxicity. I'm going to hit physical protection pretty quick here for time. And again, at that QR code, we've got a video series that covers fencing, cages, tree tubes, and also how to prep the site and plant the trees properly. I know I skipped over a lot of those critical elements today for time, but at that QR code, we've got a new Iowa Woodland Steward Toolkit video series that covers those basics of establishing and protecting trees on the landscape. So physical protection, you really need to think long term. Livestock are big. You really need to think 10, 20 years out and protect those trees until you get to the size, the bark's thickness, and the height where the canopies and the bark and also the roots are protected from the livestock that you've got on your site. This is again the fellow in Polk County, the rotational grazing operation. This is his nut planting kind of area of the farm here. And you see he's protecting these young hardwood seedlings with tree tubes. So these are great. They provide like a mini greenhouse situation in that tube, and they really encourage rapid primary growth. So those trees will be out of that tube, out of that 4 to 5 foot tube in a few years. However, even though they're that tall, their stems are still fairly small in diameter, and the bark is extremely, has very low thickness to prevent from damage from deer and especially cattle. So what he's done, he's protected those from rabbits and deer and herbicide drift, honestly, using those tree tubes. But what you may not be able to see is he's got a hot wire around this area for initial exclusion. So he's going to keep those cattle out until those trees are high enough that the cattle can't impact the canopy, and the bark is thick enough so that rubbing and leaning on them doesn't impact the stems there. So it's going to be a while before he opens this up freely for the cattle to get in there. So things to think about, there's pros and cons for tubes, cages, fencing, and we discuss all of those in that toolkit series. All right, now I'll close with this slide. Again, I'm a firm believer that trees, forests, and forestry provide benefits to the agricultural bottom line and also benefits the agricultural landscape. If you hit this QR code, you'll see a lot of great resources related to pasture trees, especially some of the, I won't say minor details, but the basics that I kind of skimmed over today, such as planting, protection, tree vigor, pruning, things like that that are going to help make a successful silvopastoral operation. And there's also a link to a great silvopasture series of publications from the University of Wisconsin Extension. And of course, I'm a resource as well. Here's my email. You can hit me up on these different platforms as well if you've got more questions on trees and pastures or just forestry in general and how that might impact your agricultural operation. Again, I'm Billy Beck, and thanks for watching Crops TV.